I'm so happy you made it here, and I don't know in your county if you had the amount of rain or problems we had, but we appreciate you coming here, and it's so good to see you again.
Thank you very much. Yeah, good to see you, and it's nice to be here again. I had a chance, as Ann said, as director of the State Office for the Aging, to speak here many times at the caregiver conference, I think, last year, and then Mary Jo, you did something at Woodstock a couple years ago that I was involved in 40 years after Woodstock, and we talked about what us baby boomers would do. But again, thank you for the invitation, and I think that what the county executive just said is amazing about what goes on here and the way people respond. I think, that we had a little disaster in our house with losing power for 3 days, and for the first time ever the basement flooded and, lost a few things. But when you think about what other people have been through, it just made it seem very insignificant to me. I did live through a flood once, though, so I know what it's like. And about 15 or 18 years ago, when I was visiting my mother up in Watertown, where I'm from. Anybody familiar with Watertown? It's kind of a city like the size of this one, a little bigger maybe. And we were there on Easter in the 90s, and the Black River, with all that snow from the lake effect up there, started to flood on Easter Sunday. And I got my kids, who were young then, out as the water was coming up on the tires of the car. And my mother stayed behind just for a few minutes, and I knew the town was there, the fire department. So when we came back, they were putting her out in a boat. So, but what I learned there is, it's so, I feel for the people who go through this, because I saw what happened there. And I know that my mother, after many months, had to put up with the after effect of that. And fortunately, she worked at Fort Drum, and a lot of the soldiers came in and ripped out her rugs and helped her in different things. But the water is a terrible thing, like smoke, and water got into everything, got into the sheetrock, and mildew and mold, and then you're finding out that even the insulation in the dishwasher has got, mold in it. And she had a piano, and the pedals, after they dried out, they fell off, so you just never know the full extent of it, and it goes on and on. And then we can still see the water line on her paneling, that went up 3 feet in that house. But I hate to tell you, but it happened twice. I wasn't there the second time, So that's the kind of thing that you go through. Let me just tell you a little bit about Statewide Senior Action, and we have some flyers that are going to be passed out. Statewide is a senior advocacy organization. I had worked there before as the director for many years, and we advocated for things like getting the EPIC program established in New York State, and a lot of other good programs, healthcare proxy bill, and different things like that. We're going to pass out some information about Statewide. We also have on this one sheet a patients' rights hotline. It's an 800 number if you need to call Albany. Some of the things that we handle are related to Medicare and Part D and prescription drugs. You have some folks here, I know, in the county who do that. But we also have staff there who can talk to you in terms of Medicare and issues related to patients' rights going into the hospital. What are your rights in the hospital? Many people feel sometimes that, they weren't sure that they were ready to go home, and we know about the rules on that, and whether you can appeal sometimes if you feel that you need more time in the hospital. So that sheet gives you the phone number where you can reach me or someone in the office, and the other sheets are more information if you want to join Statewide. We have an annual meeting in October of every year, which will be happening in Albany next month. Now, I'd like to give you a few remarks that I thought about for this event. In the midst of hurricanes, floods, earthquakes, recession, government gridlock, partisanship, fallen heroes in government, sports, and religion, we're here to acknowledge and celebrate the work of everyday heroes in the Aging Network. People like you, the staff, the volunteers who make the meals, drive their neighbors to the doctor, help with applications for heating aid, Medicare drug program, in-home services, ombuds volunteers in adult homes, nursing homes, and assisted living. You do all that. And we're here to acknowledge and celebrate the facts that you and the programs the office and the volunteers administer have made a better life for so many of our older family members, friends, and neighbors. You reduced the poverty rate among older people since the Office for the Aging here and everywhere has been around. You reduced that. And you and those in the public sector have helped increase the lifespan for older persons and improve their health status over the years. You should be thanked for, in the process of doing all of this, you treat older persons in this community as people of dignity to the last breath, not as people past their prime waiting to die. You stand not just for protecting people's rights through programs like the Ombuds program, but you help to change attitudes as well. I mentioned that 2 years ago when I was here in a different role for that 40th anniversary of Woodstock, we said that the baby boomers would not go gently into the good night when we got older, okay? We said we would continue to insist that our lives be meaningful and we be treated by society that way. We must do that, I was thinking, because it's entirely possible with some of the changes and advances in science that some of the baby boomers, the younger baby boomers, they might be here when the 60s roll around again in 40 or 50 years. Now, has anyone noticed besides me that it seems that a lot of people are living into their 80s and 90s? Okay, you noticed? Okay. Now, my grandmother, my mother's mother, lived to the age of 75. She got Alzheimer's. I remember she was only in her 60s when she got it. Back then, it was just called hardening of the arteries, right?
Right.
She's got hardening of the arteries. Now, my grandmother was 75. My mother's still living. She's 83. She has a lot of problems, but she's managing them. Still playing the organ at Fort Drum every Sunday, okay? My father was the outlier of his 7 siblings. He got colon cancer when he was 58, my age. He died at 79. He stopped smoking, though, at 58 when he got the cancer. And he probably would not have lived till 79 if he kept smoking. His parents, my grandparents, actually lived into their 90s, and 3 of my father's siblings lived into their 90s. My father's last surviving brother is now 96 years old, in a nursing home up in Auburn, Cayuga County. His mind is as sharp as a tack. He uses the computer because he likes to keep up on the sports. He actually was a football player at Purdue, and he was rollerblading till he was 82. So, now here's a few facts that I think we have to keep in mind. Since 1900, the number of Americans 65 and older increased from 3.1 million to 39.6 million in 2009 and projected to go to 72 million by 2030, just 19 years from now. In 2007, persons reaching the age of 65 had a life expectancy of another 18.6 years, with almost 20 more years for women and 17 more years for men. So if you get to 65, you're going to get to, the odds are good you'll get to 85 if you're women, or 82 if you're men, okay? In the period from 1990 to 2007, the death rates for the population of men who were 65 to 84 dropped by 41.66%.
Wow.
Okay, and I'm going to talk about why. That's good news for me, okay? If you live to 85, women will have almost 7 more years, and men 5.7. So in other words, if you make it to certain spots, that means you're in good health, you got good genes, you're going to live a little bit longer. Here's something interesting. At age 65, white people can expect to live 1.5 years longer than African Americans. But if you live to 85, African Americans are expected to live slightly longer than white Americans. That's interesting. 6.7 additional years to 6.3. Now, why are we living longer? 25% of it, they say, is you got good genes, okay? The rest is health, nutrition, environment. Stop smoking, you'll live longer. There are some people who I know who smoke and they've lived a long life, but there are not that many of them, right? You probably know people like that. We're cleaning up our environment. We're making sure that industrial sites aren't as polluted as they were. If you remember when we were all younger, they used to talk about how they could set a fire to Lake Erie near Buffalo. Things have changed. How do we know we are succeeding? The percentage of men who smoked in 1965 was 29%. By 2008, it was 11%. For women, they didn't smoke as much. It went down from 10% to 8%. However, 55% of men and 31% of women are former smokers, okay, like my father. So, we've had better medicines for heart disease. We better educate people about what they eat and how to eat. Everybody, I won't ask, but you know, I don't know if everybody's still eating pure butter all the time, but we try to cut down on that. Between 1981 and 2006, age-adjusted death rates for all causes of death among people over 65 declined by 21%. Death from heart disease, stroke, and respiratory diseases dropped by 50%, and diabetes by 29%. You know, I read another statistic, I don't have it right here, but it used to be that among people over 65, 2/3, 67%, were women and 1/3 were men, 33%. It's going up for men. It's up to about 40%, okay? And why is that? Because I just mentioned that men were they were smoking more than women. And they were working in a lot of manufacturing and industrial sites that were polluted. My grandfather came from Italy. He worked at the Alcoa plant in Messina, New York. It's the most polluted PCB place in the entire state of New York. Most of my relatives died of cancer. I don't know if it's because of that, but you gotta believe that there's some connection there, okay? Older persons are much better educated. In 1965, only 24% of the older population had graduated from high school, and 5% had a bachelor's degree. In 2008, 77% were high school graduates, 21% had graduated from college. Science and technology promise us even more in the future, a world of longer lifespans still when we figure out the genetic characteristics that cause Alzheimer's and aging itself. There's a gene that causes you to age. New computer, digital, and video technologies allow us to maintain communication with those who live alone so that no one has to feel isolated. My mother recently had a cardio thing that she wore for a month. It wasn't that halter thing, but it was something where for a month they could tell everything going on and they'd call her if something happened. So she had a little irregular heartbeat and that was all recorded. It's amazing what they can do. Even the long-dreaded nursing home is changing from an institution that seemed the best way to treat people past their prime to becoming more home-like with cottages where residents still participate in their daily life and have the freedom no longer to be treated as patients in a medical ward. We have 2 such facilities in Albany, I don't know about here, where they tore down the nursing home and now you have cottages of 12 to 15, I think 16 cottages of 12 people all built around the kitchen and all built around, there's a fireplace in the kitchen, you know, so that everybody doesn't have to get up at 7 in the morning. They have their own schedules individually. That's called the greenhouse concept.
Can they afford?
Usually the same price as a nursing home, and that's another matter. But all right, some are private pay, some are Medicaid, but all right. Despite all this stuff that I just said, here we have a very difficult fiscal and political environment. Budget cuts, you heard, at the state and the federal level. The budget cuts already enacted in Washington and the expected additional cuts have not exempted the Older Americans Act programs. What you're hearing about going on in Washington, which I won't even get into, you know, they're going to have automatic cuts. They've protected Medicaid and Social Security from some of them. Medicare would be possibly subject to some of the cuts, but mostly from the providers, a 2% cut on doctors and hospitals and nursing homes. Medicare, and that's what I just mentioned. All of this is happening, though, these cuts, as the senior population is getting bigger, And the needs are rising, as you know, during this recession. The number of people who are needing assistance for, forget the flood, everything else. You know, we're talking about food pantries and other types of assistance. So I would just say to you, at this difficult time, mindlessly cutting services to balance budgets is short-sighted because of what I said to you about all the investments that have been made and all the successes that have been made. You know, if we want to cut down on healthcare expenses, we should be doing the things that I talked about that have made life better for people and improved health. Everything this county agency, the Office for the Aging, does, and all of the offices for the aging across the state, is geared to help people remain at home as long as possible, to be independent and not on Medicaid, if possible. So let's not go back to cutting services and jeopardizing this progress. I know that every county has to make efficiencies, and I'm not saying that there can't be savings, you know, through better management perhaps. Maybe there's some consolidations and things like that that could be done. I know at the State Office for the Aging, I said to them, you know, we can do things differently here. Every state agency doesn't have to have its own personnel department, its own technology people doing their website. That could all be combined. But all of these programs that are run here at the Office for the Aging are a success because they've contributed with the public health system to increasing the lifespan, as I said, and reducing the poverty rate. All of these cuts make it more difficult to ensure the economic and health security of older persons. We know that our quality of life is not dependent just on government programs and budgets, though. They are a cornerstone to help those in need. Medicare is your health security, Social Security, your income security. But your community security is in the Office for the Aging and community-based groups. The floods have shown us again, as the county executive said, that in times of crisis, it's up to the community to mobilize and make sure that the people who are most vulnerable are helped. Indeed, despite the disaster we faced, I think we should draw inspiration from what he said about the spirit of this community and the others. I found that Governor Cuomo's call last week for volunteers, this Labor for Your Neighbor program, was really amazing, an extraordinary example of using public leadership to bring volunteers, which we were calling social capital, people power, to bear on community problems. Now, I'm going to shift a little bit as I go to the last half here and talk a little bit about some of the good news in healthcare. There's a major effort to improve the healthcare system, despite all the stuff we hear about, the debates about Medicare and all of that. The Affordable Care Act that was passed last year will be pushing for greater quality of care. One of the things in there, in addition to closing that donut hole in Medicare Part D by subsidizing that by 50% beginning this year and increasing that up to 75% over the next 10 years, there's also free screenings now for a lot of preventive illnesses, chronic illnesses, and as you might have heard from your program here, the HICAP program, there's a lot of screenings for some of the cancers that we talked about, osteoporosis and other things. So make sure to check and see what's available. Some of them are free, some of them have a small co-payment. Hospitals are being challenged with, they're going to be given lower reimbursement rates as an incentive to reduce readmissions. 18.6% of the people are readmitted to the hospital within 30 days. I think they said that a large number of those are preventable. It used to be the hospital simply sent you home and they were no longer responsible for what happened. Now they have this financial incentive to make sure that they get you the care you need when you go home so that you don't come back unnecessarily. Now there may be some people who do come back, it's just because of their health, but they shouldn't come back if they don't have to. We have programs with proven results to show through better care management that we can keep people at home where they want to be. A program at the University of California, San Francisco that began 3 years ago, is in the New York Times this week, reported the hospital readmission rate for patients with heart failure dropped by 30% when they started this program. And here's what the New York Times said this week. I like to quote it because now my son, who was an intern there 2 years ago, he's got a nice job at the Times. So he tells me, why are you reading any other paper? I said, well, the Times is expensive. But here's what the Times reported. The center's approach in San Francisco to reducing readmissions requires staff members to spend more time with patients. Imagine that. And it begins long before the patient leaves the hospital. A nurse known as a heart failure program coordinator spends at least 1 hour explaining the patient's condition to the patient, to the family, preparing them to manage it outside hospital setting. Hospital staff members make follow-up phone calls and arrange for home visits. You know, one of the key things is making sure that you have an appointment 7 days after you leave the hospital with your doctor. That was not always being done. You need to be involved as a patient too. Anybody heard of IPRO, Island Peer Review Organization? A few of you. That's the group that Medicare contracts with. They pay them to do quality of care for Medicare, and to provide trainings to doctors and hospitals. Okay, now, they have a care transitions project, and I want to read to you what they suggest you do when you're discharged from the hospital. And here's what they want you to do. Before I leave the facility, I will ensure that, okay, I have been involved in the decisions about what will take place after I leave the facility. I understand where I am going after I leave this facility and what will happen to me once I arrive. I have the name and the phone number of a person I should contact if a problem arises during my transfer. I understand what my medications are and how to take them. I understand the potential side effects of my medications and whom I should call if I experience them. I understand what symptoms I need to watch out for and whom to call should I notice them. I understand how to keep my health problems from becoming worse. My doctor or nurse has answered my most important questions prior to leaving the facility. My family or someone close to me knows that I'm coming home and what I will need once I leave the facility. And if I'm going directly home, I've scheduled a follow-up appointment with my doctor and I have transportation to this appointment. I can give this to Ann, and if you want, they have a newsletter if you want to get copies of it that has all of that. So as this process of changing healthcare unfolds, all of this was common sense stuff, but it wasn't always being asked and done. We're insisting on more quality control. And the Aging Network, here's the point I want to make. The Aging Network now is going to be involved in this with the hospitals more, or it should be. The Federal Office for the Aging, which is called Administration on Aging, and the state and county agencies are going to be involved in what we call this Care Transitions Project. Now, we started when I was director in Albany a program called Patient Care Navigators, where we got volunteers to help families and caregivers in post-hospital care to make sure that the discharge plan can be implemented and the services are there, including the transportation and home care. We know that it's the families and the caregivers who need the support to help take care of the older folks and help them to remain independent. And again, when I was the director of the State Office for the Aging, we started another project some of you know about called Livable Communities, Community Empowerment, because we believe that tapping the social capital and resources of the community, we could make a difference. We need to plan for the future to make our communities friendly for all ages, to ensure that the streets are safe for pedestrians, housing has universal design that allows those with frailties to better navigate their homes, exercise and falls prevention classes keep people stronger, and community services and transportation are available to keep people in the community. We know for sure that it's not just good health, but also social supports from a caring community that improve the quality of life and make it possible for older persons to stay connected and not be isolated. And volunteerism and helping our neighbors is a great recipe for a longer life because it keeps you active and makes life more meaningful because you make a difference in the community. Isn't that what this is all about here, what we're talking about today? Having people who care, the fact that you're here, feeling you're not alone, not isolated. Government can help, and it makes it easier for us through great programs like Medicare, Social Security, and even our County Office for the Aging. But in the end, it's our families, the caregivers, our churches, our temples, our community organizations that come together to use the funds and services that are available to make sure that New York and Ulster County is a place that's friendly, supportive of seniors. Working together, going back to what I started with about the lifespan and science, scientists, health providers, community planners, Aging Network, faith-based community organizations, community planners, government officials, families, and caregivers, we can extend and continue to make a better quality of life for older persons and their communities. And maybe one day we'll all live to 150. Thank you very much, and if there's any questions. I don't think we want to live that long, do we?
No, absolutely
Oh my gosh. We'd have to change our whole way of thinking.
Any questions? Any questions? Yes.
Is anything being contemplated within these great networks for immigrant populations and outreach to them?
Well, there better be, because some of the statistics I didn't mention were the large increase in the number of, especially younger people, but also, you know, older people as well. And we just had a forum in Albany on the faith-based community and older persons, and it was very interesting to hear that a lot of the religious groups talked about their family members who have come over. They brought their parents with them, and it's an entirely different experience when you have people of different language and also different culture. A lot of them don't trust government because the government was evil where they came from, you know, in Eastern Europe or you know what I'm talking about, over in some of the countries that are repressive. But yes, there needs to be more outreach. I know that our populations in Albany has changed dramatically. We have a lot of Russians, we have a lot of Hispanics. Schenectady is recruiting people to get more people there. They're recruiting people from Guyana. Utica is recruiting people from Bosnia. So the Office for the Aging has you have guidelines about doing outreach to all kinds of different ethnic groups. And I'm sure you're doing it, right?
Yeah, and I have to say, remember I said earlier that you all live in the best county in the state of New York. We are working with the care transitions. We have IPRO Sarah Butterfield. She will be here October. We're doing a dialogue with Sarah and all of the area discharge planners, whether it be the long-term care community or the acute care hospitals. So we're already way ahead of the...
She's the best, so you got her.
Yeah, we have the best. And we're working with, as Mike said, his programs, Consumer Navigator program, which is run through volunteers. We're hoping to initiate that. You're going to hear a lot more about the health homes. Medical homes or health homes. But I also, just a plug for statewide membership application. This is you get a newsletter for this. Right?
And we'll put you on email. And
if you want to be part of the advocacy group for seniors, you know, the $15 is worth the $15 that you would invest in this. It's a yearly membership, right, Mike?
Yeah.
And I advise everyone, if you can, to order it, share it with your residences, and so on and so forth. So, yeah. Yes, organizational rate is $75 a year.
Send newsletters to the organization.
You get.
She did the commercial better than I did.
Yeah, Can you just in 2 minutes tell us what statewide actually does? You lobby for them.
Well, I mentioned before, you know, we work on legislation and we have the 800 number in the hotline. But we do have the newsletter, and if anybody wants to, you know, give me a slip of paper with your email address, we have a newsletter on the internet, and we send news every week about what's going on here or in Washington. We'll probably report that I spoke here and talked to this group. So if you want to do that, we have the Senior Action Online News, have the annual meeting in Albany where we have 2 or 3 days of conferences, and people come from a lot of the different counties down in this way, actually. Sullivan and Rockland will be there. And we, well, one thing I will say is that I left the job as director of the State Office for the Aging, and then I went and worked with Statewide, and we restored most of the budget cuts that I would have been putting in place if I had been still the director. So I was happy about that. So we did restore the money through working with other groups for New York Connects. We did restore other budget cuts, and we restored some of the money in EPIC. We didn't get it all restored, but we got people's premiums continuing to be paid by EPIC. So that's the importance of having a unified voice across the state.
Do you want to address
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
I know we have our counselor.
She probably knows more than I do, but I am aware about the HEAT program because of the cutback in the funds, which actually there was an increase during a couple years ago when the heating costs went way up, and now we're being cut back, and the RAP program, which is the weatherization referral, is being eliminated from the packaging part of it, not the weatherization, but the ability of the office to be able to do that. So that's a big problem, and you know, the office, this is not something that's in a budget cut. This is something that the state office, not the Office for the Aging, the Social Services Department has made this decision. So I don't know if, you know, there's an effort to get them to change their mind, but they're going ahead with it.
Any other questions for Mr. Burgess? Yes.
Is there any legislation about caregivers to give some relief for funding for caregivers who have to stay home?
Well, actually, there was a big budget cut to several of the caregiver programs, so that was not good. But we're going to be working this year. We already sent a letter with AARP and about 20 other groups to Governor Cuomo saying restore the money in that. But when I was the director of the Office of the Aging, we had the Family Caregiver Council. And we went around, including, I think, here, and we had meetings, and you have the Caregiver Coalition here. So we do have a statewide coalition. You have a local coalition. There's been a lot of attention been given in recent years to caregiver issues, and I will see about legislation in terms of whether there's anything new on tax credits or anything like that. But that's the direction that I think that we should be helping people with, and we need to restore some of the money. I know that a lot of these programs might go out of business. There's one more.
Question?
What is your prediction of the future of Medicaid and long-term care, spousal Medicaid, all things with the rent?
Well, I'm not, you know, the legal part of it that you know was mentioned earlier. There's just pressure everywhere from state government to cut Medicaid. And at the federal level, they're talking about, you know, I won't get into the politics of it, you can figure it out, but there are people who are saying, let's just block grant Medicaid, give it to the states, and then if that happens, it's up to, as the gentleman said earlier, it's up to the state to figure out what to do, and they, you know, could really restrict some of the standards. I mean, the thing that I feel about Medicaid is that there needs to be national standards for that program. It can't be up to every state that, oh, if you live here, you know, you get better protection on spousal impoverishment. And we're talking about how much money that a spouse would be able to keep if the other one went into a nursing home and was on Medicaid. And this is very important because you don't want to lose all of your assets there. So these are things we're going to have to follow very closely. I didn't get into the federal budget and talk about the president's speech last night, but we're at a very difficult time that I never thought we would see, not just the recession, but we're going to have to fight to keep Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid as strong programs. I can't believe that there are people out there. There was a proposal that was made and passed in the House of Representatives that 10 years from now, because they said, we don't want this for anybody over 65, we're afraid of them, they'll vote against us. Everybody under 55, Medicare would turn into a program in what was passed in the House. Instead of being what it is now, it would only be a 33% subsidy of the cost of health care. Now, can you imagine that? Now, right now, it's a lot more than that, as you know. And that's a proposal that is out there. There's, oh, it's not a voucher plan. Well, basically it is. I mean, they give you a set amount of money, and they say, the federal government has capped the amount of money that it's going to give. Well, are the prices for health insurance going to go down, the price of prescription drugs? No. So this, to me, is not a very good proposal, and I think that we have to continue to keep an eye on that. I think it's crazy. I'm over the age of 55, and my wife is a little bit younger than that, so we would have two different health plans. You know, I'd have the regular Medicare, and she'd have the worst one. And Social Security, you know, I think they're really afraid of cutting that, but I have to say, you know, there are some things that could be done that would slightly improve, that would improve these programs, that wouldn't hurt that many people. I don't know if you all realize, but on Social Security, once you make $106,000, if you make more than that, you don't pay the Social Security tax any further on that. you pay 7.65% out of the paycheck up to $106,000, and there's a formula for this. After that, you don't pay anything on it because they said, well, you won't get as much back as you put in. But the reality is that I think it should be a little bit higher than that. There's a proposal to make it $250,000. But you know, why? One last question. Why is it that some people say we can't possibly offer any new taxes to anybody? Okay. But when they increase your Medicare by $6,000, which is what that proposal, why isn't that a tax? It's not called a tax, but they say, oh, well, it'll just cost you, $6,000 more. We need to fight that kind of thing.
Thank you.
All right.
I'm going to, does anyone need to break for 5 minutes? The bathrooms are over to the left, because we're going to have a few more of our departments talk about their programs. Feel free to get up and move around if you like. I'll be back in 5 minutes.
Come on in. They go to the bathroom, they're not going to be back in 5 minutes.
Don't leave, we have more to talk about.